Whether you have been exploring the multiverse, hopping from plane to plane, or losing yourself in the web we call the net, I have one thing to say to you. Welcome, traveler. Welcome to my second book review. Today we're going to be looking at The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This has been a book that I've been wanting to read for a very long time. And I first heard of it when one of my good friends was talking about it, and they loved this book. Now, I had no idea what it was about. I had just heard some good things, and as I was part of lots of Facebook groups, it came up quite a few times. It's been on my to-read list for ages. Like last video, I decided to make two videos. The first one, spoiler-free, for anybody who doesn't want anything spoiled, and a second video where I go into all the details, spoil the hell out of it, and just talk about the characters and the situations. Yeah, you get the gist. So, I'm going to be breaking down each book review into 5 categories. The first one being plot, how good is the story? The second one being prose, how well is it written? The third one, characters. Are the characters likable, believable, relatable? The fourth one, world building. Especially with fantasy, how believable is the world? Is it interesting? Is it just the same old trash that other authors have written? And the fifth one is the magic system. Now, I know that not all fantasy novels have a magic system, but for the most part, they do. I'll be also sharing my overall pros and cons of the book itself. In the spoiler full, I'm just going to talk about stuff. Let's begin. Plot. Now, something that I thought of doing, which I think is an easy way, is just reading the blurb. Now, I don't think I'm going to get demonetized or copyright infringed. That's not a word. I'm not going to infringe on any copyrights. The blurbs are for everybody, right? So I'm going to read these out, and you can get a gist of that, and then I'll summarize what it's really about. The Thorn of Camorra is said to be an unbeatable swordsman, a master thief, a friend to the poor, a ghost that walks through walls. Slightly built and barely competent with the sword, Locke Lamora is, much to his annoyance, the fabled Thorn. And while Locke does indeed steal from the rich, who else would be worth stealing from? The poor never see a penny. All of Locke's gains are strictly for himself and his tight-knit band of thieves, the gentlemen bastards. The capricious, colourful underworld of the ancient city of Camorra is the only home they've ever known, but now a clandestine war is threatening to tear it apart. Caught up in a murderous game, Locke and his friends are suddenly struggling just to stay alive. Now, the story so far is great. I've really enjoyed the setup, the build-up. We have Locke Lamora, who is an urchin. He's an orphan who gets taken in by this sort of king thief who trains up these children to do his bidding, squabble between each other, try to make gains, and it's a pitiful existence. So the first, minute fraction of the book begins in this sort of, what is it called? Shades Hill. A fraction of the beginning of the book starts in this dell of thieves and orphans known as Shades Hill, run by the Thief Maker. And very quickly we learn that Locke Lamora has much more ability in his lies and his ability to steal and play these games. So he's passed on to one of the Thief Maker's friends called Chains, who is, not to go into detail, but he is the eyeless priest. And from then he is trained into becoming the greatest thief. The plot is really good. The story is solid. Lots of things happen. A lot of different kinds of threads feed into the main story, which keeps it fresh and exciting. There are moments where there are interludes, as are named, and each chapter is broken down into smaller chapters, which I think is quite nice, seeing how sometimes in fantasy novels, chapters can be quite long. There are lots of flashbacks, that help explain things that go on, or help explain things that are about to happen. But lots of action, lots of dialogue, lots of intrigue, quite a lot of history and sort of world building as well, which help create this really rich tapestry of the story. On to prose. Scott Lynch is an incredible writer. His descriptions are rich. He knows how to use the language in a very effective way. There were moments, though, it seemed like he was showing off, using words that I might not be familiar with, to the point where sometimes it lost me a little bit, but not too much. One of the things he's really good at is his dialogue. Now, the wit that he has his characters use is excellent. He's very funny. There are moments even where, tragic things are happening and he's able to make you smile. So his prose is really strong. There was only a small moment at the beginning where I got a bit bogged down with some of the descriptions and some of the detail, and he does sometimes info dump. He likes to go into a lot of historical passages. He'll explain historical situations, and when you're reading it, you sometimes think, is this relevant? Everything that he mentions is relevant, but sometimes it feels like it's overdone. On to characters. Now, talking about dialogue, something that he does extremely well is build wonderful characters. The cast that he has is incredible. Locke Lamora is a lovable rogue. To make comparisons, he's not what's his name? Oh, whatever. He's not the main character from The Name of the Wind, whose name I can't remember, who is good at everything, handsome, charming, maybe not very good with the girls. But Locke Lamora is believable. He's flawed. So he's really, you want to root for him. The other characters too that you get introduced to, there's a character called, now here there's going to be some contention. I'm sure that people call him Jean, but speaking French, being set in a sort of Mediterranean, Venetian situation, I would call him Jean. That's how I was reading it, Jean. He's quite cool too, very, very strong, eloquent, kind of like Samwise, really steadfast. There's the Santa brothers, Galdo and the other kid's name, who's Callo and Galdo. Callo and Galdo. Whose names are Callo and Galdo. They often switch names, which is quite funny. It's a thing they do. And the run to the group, sort of the youngest one who's sort of training to be a gentleman bastard called Bug. It's just a great little crew of characters that you want to root for. They've all got their quirks, and characters like Chains, the eyeless priest, excellent. The way he's described is really, really cool. Onto the world building. Now, I find the world building to be probably one of the most unique settings that I've encountered. Now, again, I'm not the most well-read, so coming to a setting like this is great. It is sort of Venetian. There's a big divide between the rich and the poor. The rich, really aristocratic, loads of money. Some of the funny details that I remember were, even the cakes sometimes are made to look like cities and little ships and, really extravagant, while the poor are scummy. There's a criminal underbelly. It's really sort of, organized crime and mafia bosses and, cutthroats and pickpockets, really seedy. And what's great is you can sort of imagine, he describes the whole place in excruciating detail, sometimes to the point where it's too much, but you get the idea that there's these bridges, these catwalks that you can walk across to cross these rivers, all these canals. There's lots of boats. There's all these festivals and celebrations. Really rich. He even uses calendars and all these different kinds of seasons that play into how the city celebrate when certain events go on. Really, really rich world building. Something that's really interesting that he sprinkled in is that there's been this ancient civilization that used to be here and have created these structures out of this glass, this sort of unbreakable glass called amber glass. It was like amber glass, elder glass, I can't remember. But anyway, it's sort of this greenish glass that when the sun goes down, they call it the false light, where the glass keeps emitting light, this faint sort of ghostly light, which again creates a whole other level of world building and this incredible city that they live in, all living on top of each other. So world building, excellent. For the magic system, now this is sort of a low magic world where not everybody has magic. Wizardry and stuff doesn't really exist, but something that they do use a lot is alchemy. They will have this sort of science behind using these sort of globes that can glow. They can have these sort of even some of the makeup that they use is sort of alchemical. So it's a mix between magic and science, which I think is really cool. So it's not just people, oh, here's a wizard, he can summon or whatever. It's low magic. However, they do have these things called bonds mages. And so magic does exist in the powerful form, but it's something that's not really spoken about. It's quite clandestine. It's quite revered and even feared. So there's a whole level of that which he taps into, which I think is really cool. And leaving the mystery of magic, I think, is a really great way to build a world. So the magic system is there. It's just hinted at, which is really well done. Now, my overall prose, again, I think the characters really stand out. The dialogue is excellent. The world building, it feels real. You can smell the rotting fish, the stink of the canals, the danger that lurks around streets if you go into the poorer parts, and the aristocracy in these elaborate homes that they have, and the festivals that are so rich and believable, even festivals where they fight these sharks that jump out of the water, so the world building, everything's very, very vivid. My cons, however, would be that there are moments the prose is too rich. Feels like Scott Lynch is showing off, and it bogs down some of the pacing. Towards the end, like when you read most books, I picked the pace up. It was easier to read, but there were moments where it dragged a bit. Another thing that I didn't quite like, which I will go into more in the spoiler full, is sometimes the interludes and the flashbacks felt needless or pointless. And I felt like that I didn't want to keep reading about the history of the city, something that happened between these people. I wanted the story to keep moving forward. All in all, I think out of 5, I'd rate it 4. 4 out of 5. Really enjoyed it. Very small things that I didn't like about it, but really enjoyable. I can see why people love this story. Now, the question is, will I read the second part or the third part? Kind of like with the Poppy Wars. Nothing really held me to go, ooh, I really want to find out what happens. There's a bit of a snippet in the end of the book that shows you maybe a couple of pages of what happens in the next one. Didn't grab my attention. I was kind of, okay, well, but generally had a great time. Really enjoyed it. Scott Lynch, excellent. Yeah. On to the spoiler full part.